One of the things that I found is, especially with developers these days, the interview process can be quite drawn out, especially with a lot of the permanent opportunities, because they're not just looking for someone who's technically savvy, who can sit behind a computer and do the coding. There is more and more demand these days for the cultural fit to an organization as well, the personality fit, as they would call it, which really, I suppose in some cases, it increases the number of stages within the interview process. Some of my clients that we worked with in Germany have as many as 4 stages, if not 5 in some cases, which is ridiculous, some would say. But that's just my take on it. I think with certain clients it's a little bit different. And obviously there's a big difference between the recruitment process for permanent hires compared to contractors for freelance projects as well. Have you found that yourself as well?
From my perspective, I think the most important kind of when you're speaking, definitely to candidates, developers, is just clarity and just to confirm actually how many stages there are and how the process will look like from the start. Because again, just with some of the candidates, they are going into 2-3 processes at the same time. So they want to know, is it 2 stages? Is there going to be a coding test? Is there going to be a cultural fit as well for the person? Is there going to be an on-site visit? So obviously, like you said, with some of those hybrid roles, whether you're a contractor or some of the permanent roles, sometimes the team do want to meet that person face to face. If it's more remote working, someone does want to know, right, I'll have 1 interview, I'll have 2 interviews. Is there a test involved? And, how many stages is there and how long is the process going to be? Because as well, these guys are in demand. They are speaking to, quite a few people, especially if they're skilled. So sometimes the client needs to know as well that they just need to be very precise with the process and move quickly as well, not to lose that talent.
Yeah, and do you find, or have you experienced many circumstances or situations even where a client has changed the goalpost a little bit, where it should have been, say, 3 stages, or you've got 2 rounds, for instance, and then we'll make a decision, and then suddenly after the 2nd round, there's another stage that's thrown in there. I've had that a couple of times.
There is, but that's sometimes, I think, as well, if someone is not maybe sure about someone's skill set, or they might want another lead person on that project to speak to that person just to make sure that there is a fit. It depends completely on the client. With some clients, it could just be 1 round and they are very set on that person and they proceed straight away with an offer. Yeah. Something, Selassie, I know with some of your clients recently, you've worked with consultancies. Have you found that the process is the same?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. With contractors, I guess it's slightly different. Again, with that test side that you discussed and was talking about earlier, there's a fine line with, I guess, the client's requirements and what a candidate's requirements are. So I think it is that clarity. But what we seem to find is there are some candidates, especially if they're quite experienced, they may not want to do a test because it might be an insult to their, their experience in the field. But also for a client, they need to safeguard themselves, right? To make sure they're testing on something to make sure someone actually has the capabilities they say they do have.
Carrying on with the testing thing, do you find a lot of objection? Because I think that's one of the things I struggle with sometimes when like you say, you've got like an experienced developer with 15, 20 years experience here, and you're asking them to do a test, whether it's a perm or a freelance position.
From experience, I've had some reluctance of people doing it because the biggest, I think, factor here is time. People don't have time to do it. Sometimes people will ask, will I get paid for this hour that I'm taking out? And obviously a lot of clients are not going to do that. I find a lot of our specifically mine, consultancies, that is a requirement. Just someone obviously they want to test someone technically on both their programming languages, their frameworks, and just see obviously how efficient someone is during that 1 hour. And that can be in a form of home tasks, online coding during that technical interview. But just from my experience, it's just about being honest with that person and saying, this is the process. It's not going to suit everyone. If it's not going to be that position for them, then I'm sure obviously someone else will agree to that.
Yeah.
I think it's also being able to have that flexibility with the client. So some people will like the option of having the live coding test, and like you alluded to, the 2 types of tests. The live coding test, some people would prefer the home test. The home test people would be doing in their own time, usually a little bit longer than what the live coding would be. But some people perform better under that live coding pressure, and some people prefer and perform better outside of that on the home test. So I think it's really just being able to have a client and get them to understand there should be two options, or there could be two options that can still yield the same result.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I think that's where I do see differences in pushback from candidates, because like you say, there only seems to be sort of two versions of doing a test, and the live coding one is definitely where I get a lot of pushback. A lot of people generally prefer to go away and do the task in their own time. What amazes me a little bit is there doesn't seem to be getting around this testing side of things, and I think even way before I was doing software development, recruitment, I'm sure they were still testing their candidates as part of the process. So sometimes I find it difficult to take on board when people seem baffled that there's a test involved in the process, especially more experienced developers who've been doing it for quite a while.
I just think, the kind of ultimate goal for us is to prep our guys that are going for interviews. Some of our recent clients have done, especially those in the US, is they've allowed ourselves, Adrian, to sit in on those first interviews, and that really has helped us gain more knowledge and just find out in general what the process is, and then we can obviously go back and make sure our candidates are fully prepped. So that has really, really helped in terms of that interview preparation for that person, because especially with those clients that are consultancies, which I know you have sat on recently, that candidate will be very much prepped for that end user when that CV goes forward.
So to wrap things up, I think let's talk about just the two main points. The most common experience is probably 2 interviews, a first stage which is generally quite technical with some sort of live coding involved, a second stage which is normally either a senior manager and a client or a client side type interview, and then maybe there's that cultural round at the end. So in most cases we are talking at about 2 to 3 interviews in the process. The alternative option might be a home coding task or a private task that they have to do before the first stage, followed by the technical interview and then maybe the culture round. So they're the 2 sorts of formats that we encounter the most.